Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Max Hollein, the Marina Kellen French Director and CEO of the Met. It's great to see you. It's great to have such a wonderful turnout when we inaugurate and unveil the Genesis Facade Commission for Lee Bull, Longtail Halo. We are, of course, thrilled that Lee Bull is here with us, and also with her many friends and collaborators who are celebrating this moment. The Met's Facade Commission is, of course, an important part of our mission to really engage in a bold way with contemporary art. It is, on the other hand, also, I would say, not only a challenge, but sometimes even like a difficult task that we put in front of an artist. This is, of course, the Met Facade. It's not a white cube gallery. It's one of the noisiest corners that we can find in the museum. It's a busy facade. You have neoclassicist details, you have banners, you have hot dog vendors, you have all sorts of stuff happening, saxophone players. So in all of that, we wanted to make sure that actually we have these four niches on the facade. They stayed empty, actually, for over 100 years. And now, ever since 5 years, we've been filling them with important artist commissions. And this year, for the Genesis Facade Commission, it is Lee Bull. Curated by Leslie Ma, the Ming-Shu Shu and Daniel Shu curator of modern and contemporary art at the Met, who worked closely with the artist to make this a reality, and who will introduce Lee Bull in a moment before she will join Leslie in a conversation. I also want to thank David Breslin, the Leonard Lauder curator in charge of modern contemporary art, for his leadership, not only of the department, but also for all of our agendas in regard to modern and contemporary art. But before I turn things over, I want to say something about Lee Bull. Many reported to me, you know, last week there was a Frieze Art Fair in Korea. People were excited to be in Seoul, but basically all Koreans were very excited about Lee Bull being on the facade of the Met. Yeah? So I want to thank our many Korean friends who came over to celebrate with us. Lee Bull is not only one of the outstanding artists of our time, she is also the preeminent voice, artistic voice from South Korea. She has been challenging boundaries for 4 decades. She has found form for the human condition. She basically developed sculpture in a way that basically reflects different aggregate states. Her sculpture can be hot, can be cold, it can be rigid, it can be fluid, it can be figurative and go into abstract. It can be joyous, but also challenging, desperate. So this hybridity in her work, in the material that she uses, but even also in the psychological stasis that this work sits, is something that really makes her so stand out. And that's something that I hope you have already seen when coming to the Met and on the stairs to the Met towards the facade. So it's also, in that sense, these works, these 4 sculptures are ambassadors of more to come here at the Met in regard to how we engage with contemporary art. Most meaningful, of course, us building the modern and contemporary wing of the Met, the Tang wing, which will open hopefully in 29. We're on a rigid schedule for that, but which will give an even broader understanding and context for contemporary art. And same as Lee Bull's sculptures are deeply rooted in the history of art, in the history of sculpture, but basically propel us forward. I think that's also what the new modern and contemporary wing at the Met will do. So we are here to celebrate Lee Bull, and we actually have Lee Bull's work also in other parts of the museum. Actually, right now in our presentation of our Korean contemporary collection called Lineages Korean Art at the Met, that we have on the 25th, on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of our Korean galleries. And I want to end by thanking our friends who make this commission possible and who allow us also to move forward with more fascinating commissions. First and foremost, I want to say again, this is the inaugural Genesis Facade Commission at the Met, and we are hugely appreciative to Genesis and its leadership for this partnership, and that they will accompany us for the next years to come. I'm also very grateful for key support provided by our friends from the Korea Foundation, by our trustee Janice Lee and Joseph Bay, our trustee Cynthia Hazen-Polsky and Leon B. Polsky, by the members of the Directors Fund, the Kang Foundation, by Myung Lee and Neil Simpkins, by Helen Lee Warren and David Warren, and by Jerry Spy and Catherine Farley. Thank you all. Many of you are here tonight to celebrate with us. Thank you for making this possible. Thank you for celebrating Lee Bull with us tonight. And now I'll turn it over to Leslie Ma. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm honored to welcome you to the inaugural Genesis Facade Commission, Lee Bull, Long Tail Halo. These elegant yet haunting sculptures on the facade mark an exciting moment for the Met and for New York. And I'm grateful for the artist, her team, and my colleagues' effort in making this happen. I want to take a few minutes not to give an overview of Lee Bull's groundbreaking 4-decade career that I, as well as many of you in the audience, had admired for a long time. My attempt here is to offer a few clues from her past works to help decipher, to contextualize the new sculptures at the Met. Lee Bull began her career in the mid-1980s in South Korea. By the 1990s, she became known for her radical performances that are provocative even by today's standards, let alone in post-martial law South Korea. She wore sewn sculptures like a monster with extra limbs on the streets of Seoul and Tokyo to protest the violence and injustices inflicted on women's bodies. Her debut project in New York, Majestic Splendor, was at the Museum of Modern Art in 1997. She embellished pieces of dead fish and installed them on the museum walls in sealed plastic bags. The decay of beautiful objects and the smell of rotten fish provoked sensory reactions in more disturbing ways than the museum could tolerate. It was removed shortly after going on display. In 1998, Lee Bull's international reputation was further cemented when she was shortlisted for the Hugo Boss Prize, the contemporary art award organized by the Guggenheim Museum in New York. There, she presented her now iconic cyborg sculptures, the headless human-machine hybrids that, at the risk of oversimplification, evoke female bodies in art history and popular culture. They highlighted the tension between the organic and the artificial, the figurative and the abstract. At the end of the millennium, she became a key artistic voice to address the dystopic nature of human desire and the anxiety that came with the technological advancements, and at the same time, to critique the exoticism through fragmented yet captivating figures. As Max mentioned, we have 2 cyborg sculptures on view in the Asian wing. They are beautiful ceramic pieces, here you see on the left, but overall, they're ceramic pieces of a leg and a pelvis. The material draws lineage to artisanal traditions, but the work pushed us to think about the relationship between high-tech and craft, fetish and broken limbs. We can see these qualities in the new facade sculptures as well. In her exhibition in the new museum, in 2002, her cyborgs turned into personal karaoke pods shaped like race cars symbolically transporting visitors through time and memory by singing pop songs. This pop futurist installation fused the machine with the body while engaging and activating her audience. In the 2000s, Liebel's interest in the hybrid, highly polished forms continued, but the scope of her inquiry expanded to the grand narrative of history. Her way to disrupt this grand narrative is through deconstruction and reconfiguration, often using mass-produced industrial materials and reflective substances like glass, metal, mirror, and lights as metaphors for the personal. You can see from these hanging sculptures, which are again amalgamations of the organic and the architectural, but with a million components. They look otherworldly, but still possess intimacy. In the past decade, Liebel's expressions of the aspirations and the failures that come with the human desire for progress shifted to architectural environments and sculptural installations. Here is a selection of them at her retrospective in 2018 at the Hayward Gallery in London. For her one-person show in 2012 at the Art Sonje Center, a contemporary art museum in Seoul, she transformed one floor of the museum into a landscape of mirrors. One work, a labyrinth of lights and mirrors, created endless reflections and refractions, subjecting one's own reality into fragments. It seems to say that our pursuit for the unforeseeable will always be fantastical, illusionary, isolating, but also infinitely hopeful. This installation in Seoul 12 years ago was where I first met Liebel, and the impression her installation gave me, elegant yet haunting, dazzling yet disquieting, intimate and ironic, is what she brought to the Met facade. I now invite artist Liebel, as well as her interpreter, Estelle Lee, to join me on stage for a conversation. Thank you. Good evening again. Welcome back to New York. So I want to start it off with a little bit of history. As we had talked about, the facade has been around for a long time, for over 100 years. It was designed by Richard Morris Hunt in 1894 and completed in 1902. These niches that you see on the facade today have been empty since then. They were originally designated for classical figurative sculptures. However, because of financial constraints, we have left them empty. So it is about time that we have artists to make something for us in these built space. So I want to start off with this history. I know Liebel had been very fascinated with architecture and, of course, sculpture. So what was your first impression of this site and the niches?
그 얘기로 시작을 해야 될 것 같은데 사실 이 파사드 프로젝트가 시작한 지는 얼마 안 됐지만 이 파사드 프로젝트가 시작한 지 얼마 되진 않았지만 사실 알고 있었어요. 그래서 정말 하고 싶었었거든요. 근데 마침 인비테이션이 와서 뭐 두말할 것도 없죠. 그냥 yes.
So I know the Facade Commission project hasn't been here for that long of a time, but I was aware of it and I knew of it, and I really, really wanted to do it. And so when the invitation came, say no more. It was an absolute yes.
So you had described the niches as a place typically for statues. And there's a clear historical lineage to this. And can you tell us something about how you thought of statues, and what do you think about when you think about statues?
네, 이제 니시가 동상을 위한 공간이라고 하셨는데 역사적인 맥락도 있을 것 같은데
네,
이제
네.
동상에 대한 생각은 어떠신가요?
그 애초에 건축가가 제안했었던 그 프로젝트가 그러니까 그 동상 계획이 그 이루어지지 않았기 때문에 사실 이 빈 니시는 정말 훨씬 더 많은 질문과 그 메시지를 퍼블릭에게 전한다고 생각을 해요. 그리고 이 프로젝트는 그러니까 그 일환으로 아주 흥미로운 프로젝트이기도 하고요. 그 니시 같은 경우에는 실제로 조각, 동상을 위한 공간이죠. 그것도 전면을 그 전면부만을 이렇게 보여주는 그런 공간, 특별한 공간이고, 그래서 제가 그 지점부터 그 작업의 구상을 시작을 했어요. 네.
So because the initial statues that were proposed for the niches were not realized and the niches today are left empty, I felt that actually this brought up a lot more questions and actually gave a lot more messaging to the public. And so I think this project continues on that questioning as well. The niches, a niche space is for statues, and because it is a very frontal space as well, I thought that that would be my starting point in this project.
계속 얘기해도 될까요? Can I keep going?
Of course.
Okay. Okay. 그렇지만 모든 그 사이트라는 게 마찬가지지만 특별히 그럼 이 장소에 매트의 파사드의 이 니시는 무엇을 이야기할 것인가? 예. 그 사실은 이제 이 프로젝트를 시작할 때 그 장소적 특성, 그 다음에 그 이 건축 구조가 갖고 있는 그 양식, 그 다음에 이 장소, 이 메트로폴리탄이라는 이 미술관의 아이덴티티, 그리고 여기서 퍼블릭이 어떻게 이 작품들을 만나게 되는지, 이 파사드를 만나게 되는지, 그 성격, 그 한 몇 가지를 동시에 그 일종의 분석을 하는 거예요. 분석을 하고 거기에 맞는 어떤 언어를 구사를 할 것인가로 좁혀가는 거였었죠.
So, I mean, I think this is same for every specific location or site, but this site, the Met facade niches, I think the question for me was, what are we trying to say with the Met niche facade niches? And I think there are many elements that you have to consider in that. First is the location, and also the architectural style of the Met Museum, also the identity as a museum itself, and also another element is how will the public actually meet this facade. And so all of these questions had to come together as a starting point for this project.
Can I keep going?
Of course you can.
Okay. 사실은 이제 그런 생각을 하면서 이 장소를 여러 번 방문을 했어요. 그리고 또 하나 이 장소가 저한테 개인적으로 특별한 거는 제가 뉴욕을 처음 왔을 때 메트로폴리탄 계단 위에서 그걸 뭐라 그러죠? 핫도그? 네, 그거 먹었었거든요. 그리고 그 영화에서도 너무나 그 파사드를 많이 봤고, 그렇기 때문에 그런 일종의 기억과 그 다음에 이 안에서 제가 이 프로젝트를 하기 위해서 미술관을 방문하면서 이 미술관을 이렇게 그 컬렉션이라든지 전시하고 있는 거라든지 뭐 이런 아이덴티티를 이제 파악하는 그런 시간과 뭐 이런 것들을 이렇게 동시에 겪으면서 사실 어떻게 보면 그 길을 잠깐 잃었었죠.
So with these questions in mind, I visited the Met actually several times, and I actually remember when I first came here, I remember having hot dogs from the hot dog stand, and also the Met is so fresh in my memory because it's depicted in so many films as well. So I think there were, the memories I had of the Met previously, and also the memories I had from actually visiting the collections and seeing what the identity of the Met was as a museum. And so in that process, I believe I was a little lost in it a little bit.
우리가 무엇인가 클리어하게 그 축을 세우려고 할 때 백과사전을 보는 건 별로 좋은 방법이 아니거든요.
I believe when we're trying to clarify something, clarify something and to try to find like a core of something, it's really not a good idea to look at the encyclopedia.
Okay, I will keep going.
But I will just want to flash, you saw the sculptures and this is the proposals.
Yes. Okay. So 그래서 그 이제 제가 정신을 좀 가다듬고 그 이 건물의 파사드는 어떤 양식을 가지고 있는지, 그러니까 우리가 잘 알다시피 그 보자르 스타일의 이 건물 구조, 그 대칭적이고, 그 다음에 그 여기에 있는 나머지 장식들도 상당히 그 네오클래식 스타일이고, 그래서 그렇다면 이 언어를 그대로 사용해서 마치 이곳에 원래 있었던 것처럼 그 동상을 만드는 것으로부터 시작을 해야겠다라는 생각을 했어요. 그래서 이 뒤에 있는 그 보시는 거가 제가 그 처음 제안한 안이에요. 물론 여기서 뭐 조금 바뀌긴 했지만. 네.
So after I was lost, I tried to hold myself together and thought about what was the architectural style of the facade itself. And so we definitely see the Beaux Arts movement in the architecture, the very symmetrical styles that we see, the neoclassical styles. And so I thought, okay, let me use that same language and try to come up with something that seems like it was already there, and create a statue from that. And so what you see here behind me is the very first proposals of what I was starting to envision.
Yes, so this is the proposal that we received, and you see here there are some scale models in their two niches, and then their digital pictures of the outer niches, because these are drastically different materials. But we also wanted to share that Liebel actually had a different idea that was what you're looking at right now. One of the sculptures was proposed to be moved out of the niches, and maybe you can speak a little bit of that about your unrealized. It was quickly shot down by us.
네. 그러니까 이제 그런 여러 가지 그 건축 양식을 분석하고, 그 다음에 그 접근 일종의 이 작품을 보게 되는 접근 방식이라든지 규모라든지, 그 다음에 대중과 만나는 그 방식이라든지 뭐 이런 것들을 이렇게 종합해서 그럴 듯한 이제 조각 4점을 이렇게 배치했는데요. 사실은 여기가 이제 엔트런스가 중앙에 있고 건물은 대칭으로 되어 있기 때문에, 그리고 저에게 주어진 공간은 4개의 그 엔트런스를 중심으로 해서 4개의 그 니시인데, 그래서 그 엔트런스 쪽으로 가까이 오는 작업은 그 실제로 조금 더 접근해서 볼 수 있기 때문에 그곳은 인체형처럼 보이는 그 아주 티피컬한 그런 그 니시 안에 들어가는 조각처럼 그런 방식으로 세팅을 하고, 그다음에 나머지 양쪽에 있는 2개의 조각은 실제로 관객이, 그러니까 그 퍼블릭이 여러 가지 그 높이에서 볼 수 있는 공간은 아니에요. 상당히 아래쪽에서 봐야 되기 때문에 그것이 뭐 위쪽으로 올라가는 것보다는 훨씬 조금 더 그 퍼블릭 쪽으로 가까이 서서히 타고 내려가는 그런 방식을 선택을 했고, 이따가도 잠깐 얘기할 기회가 있을지 모르겠는데 우리가 이 파사드를 보면 그 엔트런스에는 중앙으로 올라가는 계단들이 이렇게 있죠. 아주 웅장한 계단이 있고 양쪽 가쪽으로는 그 스트리트 레벨로 해서 분수가 양쪽으로 있고 그래서 거기서 물이 이렇게 나오는 그래서 그런 구조를 맞춰서 이제 디자인을 했어요. 그리고 나서 내고 나서 뭔가 더 이 접근 방식보다 조금 더 디벨롭을 해보고 싶다. 그래서 제가 그냥 느닷없이 프로포저를 다시 보냈어요. 그래서 한 동상이 니시를 떠났다. 딱 이렇게 하고 그 계단 위에 사람들이 모이는 그 장소로 얘가 가서 그쪽으로 이동시킨 다음에 그 하나의 니시는 비워놓고 뭐 이렇게 일종의 그 다이얼로그를 만드는 그런 방식을 제안을 했었는데 실제로 여기 이 공간은 그 제한이 굉장히 많은 공간이에요. 왜냐하면 엄청난 그 퍼블릭이 이동하는 곳이기 때문에 위험 문제도 있고, 그래서 그거는 그런 점 때문에 곤란하다. 그리고 사실 이 건축물은 제가 그 벽 하나 건드려서는 안 되는 어떤 내일도 안 되고 뚫어서도 안 되는 그런 조건이 있었기 때문에 그런 게 좀 곤란하다라는 얘기를 듣고 그냥 바로 접었어요. 그거는.
So, based on the analysis that I had approaching the scale of the building, how it would meet the public, I actually I proposed for sculptures. When you see the entrance, of course, is in the center, and then symmetrical to them, I was trying to use the niches to place 4 different sculptures. And so the niches that are closer to the entrance, the inner niches, because you're able to see a bit more in detail as you're entering, I wanted to put a humanistic sort of sculpture that is a typical statue that would usually go into a niche space. And then in the outer niches, there are not a lot of levels that you can actually view those sculptures from. You actually only have, your vantage point is usually from below. So I was actually wanted to make it actually flow out toward the viewer to accommodate for that. And also I was trying to fit in the actual way the building was built with, the center stairs, the fountains on each side. That was also a consideration when working with the sculptures. But I wanted to develop this idea further, and I suddenly came up with the idea that one statue leaves the niche and goes out to the stairs. And so I proposed that we leave one niche empty and have one of the statues be on the stairs to create some sort of dialogue with the viewer. But because I was dealing with many, many spatial limitations, there was a lot of foot traffic, of course, in front of the Met. There were safety issues, so I was quickly told that it was not feasible. And of course, because I had a limitation of not being able to touch any part or modify any part of the facade whatsoever, I was that was quickly struck down, and I quickly folded that proposal.
There's always lots of technical challenges, architectural challenges that the artists face, and this is exactly why we have this facade commission to maybe make artists challenge us. Sorry that we had to not realize this one.
저는 그런 식의 제안이 저의 도전심을 더 고취시키기 때문에 사실 더 좋아요. 언제나 반갑습니다, 여러분.
I actually really, it's great as a challenge. Like the more limitations you give me, like I can work with that, and I love overcoming it and finding ways to be creative. So that's a welcome sign for me.
So now you see them nicely tucked in the niches as where they should be. Sorry. But I wanted to point to the forms. You're very obviously aware of the architectural history, the connotation, the forms, and you have given us these sculptures with amalgamation of all kinds of traces that you can find. Maybe if you don't mind sharing with us, how should we look at them? What are their relationships? This is the one that's on the left side when you come into the museum, and you have also the one on the right. So if you can tell us a bit more about these humanistic shapes.
네, 좀 더 인간 형상을 닮은 TCS 1, 2에 대해서 뭐 형상에 대해서도 말씀하셔도 되고 뭐 어떻게 우리가 관객이 바라봐야 할지 그 둘 간의 관계는 어떤지 말씀해 주시죠.
실제로 그 니시에 그 놓여지는 작품들은 대부분 그 인체 구조와 비슷한 걸 갖는데요. 그 사실 이 니시는 정해져 있는 거고, 그 프로포션을 이렇게 보면 그 니시의 프로포션에 맞는 그 스케일이 있어요. 그것이 인체를 연상시킬 때든 또는 어떤 다른 그 동상이 오게 되든, 그래서 그 스케일을 맞추고, 그래서 정확히 그 퍼블릭이 그걸 봤을 때 이 니시가 같이 작동을 하는, 이 동상과 함께 니시의 그 형태가 같이 어우러져서 일종의 그 콘텍스트를 만들 수 있는 이제 그런 방식으로 접근을 했고요. 그 사실 여기에 나오는 두 개의 인체를 닮은 조각은 뭐 인체를 닮긴 닮았는데, 실제로 뭐 머리가 있거나 뭐 팔이 있거나 이렇지는 않죠. 근데 우리가 그 사실 어떤 사물을 보든 그 인간의 모습을 거기서 읽어내려고 하는 그런 본능이 있죠. 그래서 이거는 사실 그런 그걸 의도적으로 이렇게 드러내는 것이고요. 그 다음에 뭐 머리가 있어야 되는 위치에 머리처럼 보인다던가, 뭐 이렇게 다리가 있어야 되는 위치에 다리처럼 보인다던가, 뭐 이렇게 돼 있고, 실제로 이 작품의 그 요소들, 이렇게 그 파편적인 요소들로 구성되어 있는데, 그 이 파편적인 이 부분들은 여러 시대에 여러 지역에서, 그러니까 시간과 뭐 그 지역을 또 어떤 문명권이든지 뭐 이런 것들을 다 이렇게 관통하는, 우리에게 굉장히 익숙한 어떤 레퍼런스들을 사용을 했어요. 그래서 그게 비단 인간의 형상을 닮은 것뿐만이 아니라 사실은 건축적인 그 요소도 있고, 저 안에 뭐 다른 기계적인 요소도 있고, 그러니까 마치 그 매티의 콜렉션처럼, 그래서 그런 것들을 이렇게 결합시킨 것들이죠. 그렇지만 그 결합은 제 의도로서는 그 결합은 반드시 보기에 자연스럽게 어떤 한 스타일을 구사하는 것처럼 보여야 한다. 뭐 이런 생각을 하고 접근을 한 거예요.
So usually in niches we see a human form of a statue, but I think what's important is working with the proportions of the niche. And first of all, you have to find a scale that will fit within the niche, whether that is a humanistic form or otherwise. And so finding that right scale first came first, and then it was important to me that once the statue was in the niche and the statue would work in concert with each other to create a context together. And so the two humanistic statues that you see, they look humanistic at first glance, but when you look closer, it's not like they have an arm or it's not like they have a head, but I do feel it is in our nature as human beings to always read human qualities when we look at something. And so my intention, I would say, is to, evoke that kind of sensibility of seeing humanistic qualities, where it looks like there should be a leg, it looks like there is something that looks like a leg, and so on and so on. And also the different parts that are constructing each of these sculptures, they differ in sense of what kinds of regions they may come from, or what time periods they come from, what civilizations they come from. I think a lot of these parts really go through the entirety of history or regions or civilizations, so they evoke a very familiar sense, and there are very familiar references, I think, when you look at them. And so whether those references are humanistic or architectural, that like we were talking about, or even mechanically, there are some similar familiar things that you might be able to read. And so my intention was to combine all three of those aspects and to ultimately come up with something that really portrays a natural style.
제가 조금 더 부연 설명을 하자면, 그러니까 그것이 이렇게 그렇지만 결국에는 어떤 한 가지 스타일처럼 보이는 그런 그 의도를 했다고 했는데, 왜냐하면 제가 분석하기로는 우리가 그 작품을 만날 때 그 일종의 화이트 큐브 안에서 작업을 볼 때는 그 작업을 작정하고 보죠. 아트워크를 볼 것이다. 그리고 그 작품은 뭘 말하고 있는지, 그리고 그 시간이 지나 그 다음에 그걸 본 다음에 거기서 떠날 수 있어요. 근데 이 퍼블릭 작업이라는 거는 그 퍼블릭이 원튼 원하지 않든 여러 그 다른 조건에서, 이를테면 계절이라던가 뭐 아니면 밤낮이라던가 다른 그 라이팅이라던가 또는 그 피리어드 안에서 일어나는 뭐 여러 가지 다른 사건이라던가 자기의 기분이라던가 이런 것들이 다른 상태에서도 이 작업을 보게 되기 때문에, 그런 경우에는 이것이 클리어하게 그 빨리 파악되는 어떤 것으로 보이는 것보다는 굉장히 거기에 있었을 법한 것인데 서서히 그것이 다른 상황에서 다른 이야기를 하고 다르게 접근할 수 있고, 이런 좀 더 이렇게 뭐라 그럴까, 시간을 길게 두고 훨씬 더 천천히 천천히 그렇게 그 볼 수 보는 거 보게 된다고 생각을 해요. 그 퍼블릭 아트라는 거는. 그래서 좀 그 조건에 맞춰서 뭐 강렬하게 어떤 인상을 준다던가 이런 쪽보다는 그 작업을 보면서 서서 시간이 지날 때마다 이것이 어떤 식으로 변하게 되는지 관심이 있다면 그렇게 보기도 하고, 또 뭐 비와 함께 눈과 함께 또 야간에 굉장히 드라마틱한 그 라이트와 그 빈 공간에서 또 이게 어떤 얘기를 하는지 뭐 이런 여러 각도로 볼 수 있는 그 기회를 만들려고 노력을 했습니다.
And to sort of add on to that, I did say that ultimately all of these elements are coming into consideration to portraying a sort of uniform style. But I think what's important, especially in this work, is that usually when viewers go to see a work of art, it is in a white cube where viewers are purposefully going to, see, like, listen to a message, and they can also leave of their own will. But a public work such as this, whether you want to or not, you will sometimes be confronted with it, and under different conditions as well. It can be day or night. The weather might be different. You may be having different emotions on a certain day, and day by day, and what's happening around you in that space could be different as well. And so I thought it was important to be able to see through that lens. And so rather than going for just some very succinct sort of work, I wanted this to be able to tell a different story and a different approach every time you were able to see it or when you were confronted with it. And so I think my attempt was to have a more longer, expanded relationship to time with this work and with the viewer. And so in order to work with those conditions, rather than just thinking of how I would make a stronger impression, I thought about how this would, how the work will be able to change whether it was raining or snowing or when you were looking at it at nighttime under the lights. How would it be able to create different stories?
제가 구구절절하게 얘기를 해가지고 이야기가 길어졌는데 그러니까 조금 짧게 얘기하자면 그냥 그러니까 그 일종의 그 컨텍스트를 만드는 거고 다양한 그 컨텍스트의 변주를 그 뭐 계획했다. 뭐 이렇게 하면 가장 짧게 얘기할 수 있을 것 같아요.
I think I may have gone on for a little too long, but to be a bit more succinct, I think what I'm ultimately trying to say is I'm trying to create different contexts and finding different ways that the viewers will be able to meet this work.
I think one of the contexts is the Met, and I think you said, it's a thankless task to try to deal with an encyclopedic museum. But we, if you can help me with the next slide, please. We want to flash through a few images when Liebel came through the museum for site visits to look at the modern contemporary department, as well as other departments' works that are quite interesting that struck a conversation. Oops, the dog. Hang on. We wanted to flash through a few things that I think would be interesting for the connections. Of course, we don't want to pinpoint which part came with where, but I think it's quite interesting to see some of these works in the modern contemporary department that we had a really good time talking about, whether it's Baccioni's futuristic sculptures, or the Léger's piece with two figures and a dog, as well as Picasso's nude descending. So do you want to speak a few words? I know this is, it's quite interesting to see these connections, and I hope we can hear from you how you thought about them when you came to see.
그 의식적으로든 또는 무의식적으로든 그 제가 본 것들이 어떤 영향을 미쳤을 거예요. 제가 작업을 하는데 제가 의식적으로 레퍼런스로 사용하지는 않았지만 그 사실 그 컬렉션을 볼 때는 사심이 훨씬 더 강했어요. 그래서 제가 원래 좋아하는 작품들을 실제로 보는 것에 목표를 좀 가지고 둘러봤고, 그리고 여기 컬렉션은 너무나 광범위하기 때문에 사실 뭐 이를테면 골라서 본다기보다 그냥 자연스럽게 몇 개 열려 있는 갤러리들을 돌면서 보기 시작하다가 또 언뜻 보이는 다른 방에 그 작품의 부분적인 모습을 보고 뭐 그리로 빨려 들어가기도 하고 뭐 이런 식으로 했었는데, 지금 여기 나오는 그 작업들은 특히 제가 얘기를 많이 했었던 것 같아요. 그러니까 뭐 그 보치오니 작업 같은 경우에는 원래 저의 페이보릿이기도 하고, 그리고 제가 오래전에 작업을 했었던 그 사이보그 시리즈의 굉장히 중요한 레퍼런스 중에 하나였고, 그 다음에 그 레제 드로잉은 제가 너무 운이 좋게 실제 드로잉을 그 수장고 안에서 그 정말 거의 만졌는지는 모르겠는데 만져보다시피 했어요. 그래서 사실 그 작가의 작업도 굉장히 흥미로워하지만 이 드로잉은 특히 이 드로잉이 두 피겨와 애니멀과 강아지와 그 다음에 그 인테리어 이렇게 그런 것을 이렇게 그린 작업인데, 이걸 보면서 제가 이쪽의 작업 중에서 이렇게 동물과 같이 있는 그 작업들을 본 적이 없는데, 그래서 너무 흥미로웠었죠. 그래서 그 동물을 여기서 다루는 그 요소가 흥미로워서 그거 한참 들여다봤고, 그 다음에 뭐 피카소 같은 경우에 그 바디는 사실 우리가 이 작품도 저도 여기서 처음 본 건데, 그러니까 그 인체를 다루는 그 사람이 그 일종의 만들어낸 그 언어로 그 인체를 다루는 방식 뭐 이런 것들이 또 흥미로웠었고, 그 다음에 could you just do the next one? Next slide is also reference, right? 오케이. 그리고 그러다 느닷없이 이 뭐 그리스 조각들도 또 그리스 로마 조각들로 넘어가서 갑자기 그걸 보기 시작을 했는데요. 그러니까 또 이 작업들의 특징 중에서 제가 이 작업 같은 경우에는 우리가 이 다 비슷비슷해 보이는 이 인물들을 어떻게 구별하느냐, 이게 이야기하는 것인지 그 아이덴티티를 어떻게 뭐 찾아내느냐 할 때 그 신화 스토리를 기반으로 해서 예를 들면 왼쪽 가슴 옆에 거기 상처가 이렇게 있는 그런 모습이 있다면은 그거는 뭐고 뭐 이렇게 거기에 뭐 사냥개와 뭐 그 사냥개가 두 마리가 같이 있다 그러면 뭐 다이아나고 이런 식으로 그 스토리를 기반으로 해서 형상을 우리가 읽어낸다 뭐 이런 거 같은 거 얘기했었던 기억이 나고 그다음 가운데에 있는 그 이 한국말 우리는 수석이라고 불리는데 그 이거 스콜라스락이라 그러잖아요. 그러니까 그 여기 그 작품들이 있어가지고 봤는데요. 그러니까 저걸 보면서 또 뭐 많은 생각을 했어요. 그러니까 그 자연을 그 일종의 자연을 그러니까는 자기화하려고 하는. 그러니까 이를테면은 뭐 이게 말이 좀 적절치 않은 것 같고 이를테면 서양에 가든이 있다면 그 아시아에서는 가든보다 저런 수석 뭐 저런 게 있는 거죠. 저기서 미니어처의 자연을 자기가 그곳에 가지 않더라도 그걸 놓고 즐기는 거예요. 그것을 이렇게 상상하면서 그런 게 있어서 사실 저것도 되게 흥미롭고 저걸 어떻게 디벨롭해서 작업으로 한번 풀어보고 싶다. 그 가든과 수석과 이 두 가지를 이용해서 뭐 그런 생각을 했고 그다음에 마지막에 있는 그 부르주아 그 방은 제 생각에 저 방은 제가 이 매트 커미션이 정해지기 전에 결정됐다는 거 전에 왔을 때 본 것 같긴 한데 확실치는 않지만 특히 저 그림에 굉장히 끌렸었죠. 그리고 뭐 여러 가지 얘기를 했었던 기억이 나는데 그 얘기를 지금 여기서 할 것까지는 없고 저희 엄마 중에 하나라고 제가 그런 얘기 했었던 것 같아요.
So I feel that definitely been these works have been subconsciously influenced by the works that you see on screen right now. I think one of my personal goals was to see these works that I've loved in person. The Met, of course, you all know, the collections are so vast. I will start out with several galleries and then just get sucked into another gallery that's just around the corner. But to start with these, the Boccioni, he is one of my favorite artists and also a very important reference for my previous Cyborg series. And to see Leger, I was actually able to see his actual drawings. I don't remember if I actually touched the drawings, but I remember getting very close to the drawings themselves. And I thought it was so interesting because this one depicts a dog in an interior space, and I thought that was very rare for an artist to deal with an animal in that sense. And so I thought that struck me as very interesting. With Picasso, I think it was the first time I saw that work here at the Met, and as always, I think the way he works with the human form is always so interesting. And then, of course, we went into the Greek and Roman sculpture galleries, and I remember talking with Leslie about how do we tell these sculptures apart? They look so similar to one another, and it's from the stories that we have to differentiate them. You know, for example, if there's a woman with a wound on her left breast, that's how we know that, that's a wounded Amazon. And then if a sculpture has hunting dogs with her, that's Diana. So yes, how we are able to read forms through the stories that the sculptures are telling. And then the Scholar's Rock, I thought this was interesting in contrast to the concept of the garden, I think, in the Western world, but I think in the Eastern world, this is usually, I think it's almost like you're trying to see a miniature of nature, in a Scholar's Rock, rather than having a garden, which is sort of a different thing. So yeah, I thought that was interesting, and I was like, oh, how do I, maybe in the future I will develop a series using, the contrast of a garden and having a Scholar's Rock in there. And then last but not least, Bourgeois' painting, I think I think I might have seen this before the commission, but yes, I was very attracted to this painting as well.
At one point when we were walking in the galleries for this Louise Bourgeois show, Liebel, I asked her what she thought, and Liebel, you said, I have many mothers, and she is one. So I think that really resonated a lot with us. I wanted to turn our conversation maybe to the facade, well, to the studio, because how did these sculptures get here? And so this is the view from outside of her home studio, outside of Seoul. And we wanted to flash you a few sort of process images, how we came to be today. So here are images of her sketches, also a scale model of the niche on her desk. By staring at it, I think, thinking about proportions. And then I wanted to maybe just go through some of these slides, and maybe you can tell me how you want to walk them through, because these are really complex, handmade sculptures. In this time and age, it's quite rare the artists make these things herself, and you can really see, we'll show you these intricate insides of the sculptures that you're not able to see when they're finished. So maybe you can talk, and then I can advance the slides for people to see.
네. 그러면은 맨 처음 아까 그 drawing하고 on the table on the desk. 여기 지금 보시는 것 중에서 가운데 있는 게 제일 처음이에요. 그 보시면 아시겠지만 이 매트 파사드의 그 니쉬를 스케일 모델로 만든 거고, 그 스케일 모델, 그러니까 그 니쉬의 스케일을 이해하기 위해서, 그 규모를 이해하기 위해서 그거와 같은 스케일의 휴먼 인간을 이렇게 거기다 대본 거예요. 그랬더니 1.5배 정도의 크기더라고요. 그래서 저기 보면은 뭐 저거는 이렇게 이를테면 누가 이렇게 서 있고 그 위에 누가 앉아 있고 이런 구상을 한 게 아니라 정확히 스케일을 알기 위해서 그 서 있는 사람 위에 앉은 사람을 이렇게 얹어가지고 대본 거죠. 그래서 거기서부터 그 크기를 접근하기 시작을 한 거고, 그리고 그 이쪽으로 있는 드로잉은 이제 그 스케일을 결정한 후에 여기서 어떻게 그러니까 일종의 바디로 접근할 것인가, 아니면 뭐 이를테면 제가 1년에 최근에 그 관심을 갖고 있는 그 아키텍처럴 폼이라든지, 아니면은 뭐랄까 근대화의 그 전형적인 표상 중에 몇 가지 있는 그런 모습들, 뭐 이를테면 타워라던가 뭐 하이웨이라던가 뭐 이런 식의 구조를 가지고 접근할 것인가를 좀 드로잉을 해보면서 그 생각을 해본 거고, 근데 저 드로잉을 보시면 아시겠지만 그 실제로 제가 최근에 다루고 있는 그런 랜드스케이프의 형태의 것들은 이 규모, 이 파사드의 규모에 저게 놓이면 그 실제로 그게 이렇게 미니어처처럼 보일 것이다. 왜냐하면 그거는 랜드스케이프를 축소한 상태인데 다시 그 축소한 것이 더 작은 스케일로 들어가게 되기 때문에, 그래서 그 부분은 이제 포기를 하고 그 인체 형태를 그 닮은 그런 형태로 이제 구상으로 더 접근하기 시작을 한 거죠. 그리고 이 오른쪽에 보시는 그림은 제가 이 구상 전체를 그 뭐 모델을 10분의 1로 만들었거든요, 손으로. 그래서 만들어서 그거를 실제로 그러니까 1대1 사이즈로 만들 때 그거 뭐 이를테면 3D로 읽어가지고 뭐 기계로 깎아서 이렇게 한다든지 뭐 이런 것보다는 그 모델을 10배로 직접 계산해서 튀겨서 만들자 직접. 그 과정, 만드는 과정 중에서 나는 더 디벨롭을 할 수 있는 기회가 생기고, 그 거기서 폼도 그렇고, 그 다음에 거기서 선택한 어떤 재료라든지 뭐 이런 것들도 더 조금 더 열어놓고 하고 싶어서 이제 모델을 이제 사진을 모형을 찍어가지고 구분을 해놓은 거예요, 제작하기 위해서. 일단 요거 설명하고 그 다음에 이제 실제로 만드는 과정 설명드릴게요.
So the middle photo is actually the very first start of the project itself, where we started with a scale model to understand the space of the niches, and we made a little human figure to see how see the actual proportions that would work in that. And so we were working. I found that it was like 1.5 times the scale that we were working with. So there's we put in like there's a person that's standing and then there's a person that's like sitting, just to work with the proportions and to see how that would work out. And then the drawings on the right, once we got the scale of the niche in mind, it was a matter of how do we want to approach that scale? Do we want to approach it architecturally, or do we want to approach it in the sense of talking about modernity, for example, like towers or highways, things that we think of when we think of modernity. In my current works, there are several like landscape-based works, but I felt that if I were to approach it in a landscape way, the facade, the landscape will end up looking like miniatures, just because it will look even smaller once we actually work with scale. So we had to do away with that thinking, and that's when we settled with a humanistic form that would go into those niches. And the photo on the left that you see is where we were working with a handmade model that was 1/10 of the scale of the actual sculptures that you see at the facade today. There was some 3D printing involved, but in my thinking, I was thinking, let's work with 1/10 of the size that we will eventually work with, and then we will blow it up 10 times larger, right? I thought thinking that way would give me more time to develop the form in the process, as well as think more about the materials that would be able to go with this. I wanted to work in a more open style, and so that's what you see on the left here.
So why don't I flash the pictures through, and then we have one last question for you. I know you all are eager to get to the reception.
But I have to say,
yes.
It's about. I will try it very short. It's okay. 그 아까 제가 그렇게 만들겠다고 했던 결정을 실제로 실행하면서 너무나 후회했어요. 그러니까 왜냐하면 표피를 이룰 재료를 결정을 했기 때문에 그게 1.5cm 두께거든요. 그래서 제 작품, 그러니까 구상한 그 모형을 10배로 튀기면서 모든 표면에서 1.5cm를 뺀 부분으로 스트럭처를 구성을 했어야 됐어요. 그래서 우리 팀과 제가 그 계산을 하느라고 시간이 제가 생각했던 것보다 한 3배 정도 걸린 것 같아요. 예. 그래서 너무 많은 시행착오를 겪고 제가 왜 이 길을 선택했을까 뭐 후회도 하고, 근데 나중에 돌릴 수도 없고, 그래서 그냥 just keep going. 그래서 you can see. 그래서 제 여기 웃는 사진은 형태가 거의 다 완성돼 갔기 때문에 너무 기뻐서 지금 웃고 있는 거예요.
So after we made all these decisions, in the making of the whole making process of it, I regretted it so much because we had already decided that the surface of the sculpture would be 1.5 centimeter thick, which is a very, very thin surface. But then we had to blow it up 10 times. And so there had to be so many calculations involved to figure out how we had to structurally compose it under that very thin surface layer. And I think it took us 3 times longer than we had anticipated. So many trial and error that was happening, but also like I couldn't go back on that decision, and so we just kept on going. And you see me laughing here in the far right photo, and that is because we at last were almost done with the actual structure of the musculature of the sculpture, and that's why I'm smiling.
if she had said no to your visit in the past 6 months, it's because she's doing this and by hand. So this is the other two sculptures of the secret shares. You could see they're in progress with these parts that's attached to it. The studio assistants were also working tirelessly. And here you see one of the dishes sculptures kind of taking shape. You'll see the tip that's still a little bit bare. Many of the sculptures are worked on horizontally in the studio, and this is getting its color. Here you see another one almost done. And actually, I have to say, maybe many of you don't know, that one of the challenges for the Facade Commission is that you have 1 day to install. We have to close the sidewalk. We have to install the sculptures one by one between the union allowed time. So the studio, with this high pressure during this very hectic time of production, they did a mock rehearsal for the install. So here, looking at the sculptures, being prepped and getting ready and basically making a manual for us for the day. Do you want to say something about the process before we have one last question for you?
오케이. 일단 지금 여러분들이 밖에서 보시는 작품에 1.5cm 안에 저렇게 복잡한 스트럭처가 있다는 거를 얘기할 수 있어서 너무 다행이고요.
I just want to say that I'm glad that you are seeing what a complex structure there is under that very thin surface that you see outside of the facade.
그리고 하루 만에 4개의 조각을 굉장히 어려운 위치에 있는 곳에 설치를 해야 된다는 건 정말 저한테 굉장히 이렇게 압박이 됐어요. 그래서 제가 결정을 한 거는 물론 방식도 심플하게 해야 되지만, 아주 심플한 방식으로 설치를 해야 되지만, 이게 실제로 어떻게 가능할지 시뮬레이션을 했어요. 그래서 구조를 똑같이 만들어가지고 시뮬레이션을 해서 이거는 하루 안에 된다. 저희가 시뮬레이션에 성공을 했기 때문에, 그래서 이제 사실 자신만만하게 보냈죠. 물론 여기 와서 좀 떨리긴 했지만. 근데 뭐 크게 문제 없이 굉장히 빨리 끝났어요. 근데 한 가지 부연 설명을 하자면, 왜 이렇게 복잡한 구조를 짰는가 내부에. 왜냐하면 제가 서페이스로 선택한 재료가 아주 약한 재료이기 때문에 그래요. 그러니까 사실 고탄력 스펀지 같은 거기 때문에 스펀지 혼자서는 버텨낼 수가 없어요. 폼을. 그리고 여기서 9개월 동안 눈과 아주 낮은 온도와 이런 것들을 다 버텨야 되기 때문에, 그래서 제가 선택한 방법은 정교하게 이 구조를 거의 흡사하게 메탈로 짠 다음에 그 위에 얘를 스킨을 거기에 입히자. 그래서 무게를 낮추고 이 재료의 특성을 겉으로 드러내고, 이제 이렇게 하기 위해서 이렇게 할 수 없이 굉장히 복잡한 구조를 갖게 된 거죠. 그래서 뒤에 조금 아까 보시면은 뒤에 시크릿 시어러라고 2개의 작품은 제가 이 골조를 굉장히 한 수천 개의 골조 구조를 만들면서 생각한 게 너무 아까운 거예요. 걔가 하나도 안 보이는 게, 오로지 기능으로서만 존재해야 된다는 게. 그래서 겉에 표피를 많은 부분을 투명한 재료를 썼어요. 그래서 투명한 재료를 통과해서 실제로 가까이서 보면 안에 구조를 들여다볼 수 있게. 그래서 물론 아쉽게도 이번에는 높이 있기 때문에 그렇게는 어렵겠지만, 요즘 사람들은 핸드폰을 많이 쓰잖아요. 그러니까 와서 이렇게 계속 돌리면 보실 수 있을지도 몰라요. 네.
So yes, like Leslie mentioned, the pressure was quite on for us to install all of these 4 sculptures in a single day. And so not only did I want to make as simple an installation as possible, we ran many simulations to actually confirm that we would be able to succeed in installing all of it in 1 day. And so I was pretty confident, like nervous a little on the day, of course, but luckily we were able to install with not many issues at all. To add on just a little bit more about why the skeleton of this is so complex is because the surface material that I mentioned is a very weak surface material. It's almost like a very high elasticity sponge, and so it alone cannot withstand the elements of the weather or 9 months of, for example, snow that we would probably get here. So that is why we had to work with such a complex metal skeleton, and then to coat it with the skin to make it lightweight, but also to be able to withstand all that would be going on environmentally. And so the secret share that you see on the outer sides, I actually went through almost like that thousands of skeleton models for this, and I thought it was such a shame that it would only be serving a functional purpose and no one would be able to actually see the insides. And so because of that, I actually made a lot of the surface material a bit transparent, so that if you look closer, you can actually see the metal structure that is built inside that is supporting the actual sculpture. I'm not sure if you can actually see it that up close, but since we all have phones now, if you kind of go really into it, you may be able to see that skeleton within.
So to wrap up, can you tell us what long tail halo means?
네, 마무리를 하자면 long tail halo 제목이
조금 더 길게 설명할 걸 그랬어요, 앞에 거를.
I should have explained a bit more in length before, but
사실 이 제목을 제가 처음에 생각했을 때 아무도 물어보지 않을 거라고 생각했는데 너무 많은 사람들이 물어봐요. 이게 무슨 뜻이냐. 근데 사실 이게 이거를 설명해서 이해하는 것보다, 왜냐하면 그 각각의 단어들은 굉장히 쉬운 단어이기 때문에 이 세 단어가 만나서 어떤 작용을 하는지 그걸 느끼는 게 되게 중요하거든요. 그래서 그렇게 얘기하면 그래도 조금만 더 설명을. 그래서 사실 그래서 굉장히 그 말을 아끼다가 어젠가 그냥 이렇게 조금만 예를 들면 좀 우회해서 다른 일종의 아주 작은 단초랄까 이런 걸 얘기하자면, 글쎄 이 단어는 지금 제가 얘기하려고 하는 거가 다는 아니지만 이를테면 시간과 관련된 단어, 또 물질과 관련된 단어, 그 다음에 하나는 정신과 관련된 단어, 이런 식으로 접근을 해봐도 되지 않겠냐. 근데 사실은 훨씬 더 많은 접근 방법이 있기 때문에 제가 얘기한 건 사실 잊어버리셔도 돼요. 왜냐하면 시간이기도 하지만 또 거리이기도 하고, 또 그것이 일종의 물리적 세계를 보여주는 것이기도 하고, 또 아까 정신이라고 얘기했던 것도 또 사실 물리학에서도 그 단어를 갖다 쓰기 때문에 그럴 때는 또 물리적 현상을 얘기하는 것이기도 하고 그렇죠. 근데 아무튼
So when I first came up with this title, I thought no one would ask. But people keep asking me, what does it mean? And so I would answer, rather than explain what it means, this title is comprised of 3 easy words, and I think it's just important to feel what those 3 words do together in relation to each other. But people kept asking, can you give us a little more? So I think I talked about this yesterday, but to give maybe a roundabout clue as to the meaning, I guess, I think, one word deals with time or the temporal aspect. Another word deals with the material or the physical, and the third word or another word deals with the mind. And so I think that's maybe a clue that I can offer. But also, I want to say you can also forget about what I just said, because I think these 3 words and these 3 concepts, I think, are interchangeable too, right? Time can become distance, and physical can become a mental or spiritual, or also the spiritual can become physical. And so I think there is a lot of room there to think about.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being with us today and giving us such beautiful sculptures. And thank you to your whole studio team and to Estelle's great interpretation. And thank you. And we invite you to a great evening outside with the artists, as well as on the way out, don't forget to look at the sculptures. Thank you.